Greetings, explorers of history. Today, we set sail on a journey across the sunlit Mediterranean, guided by the legendary seafarers known as the Phoenicians. Born along the narrow coastlines of ancient Lebanon, these master navigators braved tempests, mapped uncharted waters, and forged connections between distant civilizations. They were more than traders. They were cultural ambassadors, carrying goods, ideas, and innovations from port to port. In this voyage, we'll follow the trail of their prized treasure, Tyrian purple dye, a color so rare and radiant, it became the symbol of kings. But beyond purple, the Phoenicians gifted the world something even more enduring, the alphabet that shaped human communication for millennia. Through Caesar chapters, we'll uncover their rise, their bustling city-states, their ships that kissed every horizon, and their influence on the ancient world. We'll meet the merchants, sailors, and rulers who transformed trade into an art form and diplomacy into a legacy. So, fasten your sails, steady your hearts, and prepare for a cinematic journey through salt and sun, trade and triumph. The tide is high, the wind is fair, and the Phoenicians are waiting to tell their story, but Swin is along a slender ribbon of coastline where the mountains of Lebanon rise steeply from the Mediterranean Sea. A civilization took root. This was Phoenicia, a land without vast plains or endless rivers, yet blessed with harbors that welcomed the waves and winds. The Phoenicians learned early that their wealth would not come from fields, but from the sea itself. From the rocky beaches of Byblos, the cedar-covered hills above Sidon, and the island fortress of Tyre, fishermen mended nets as sails fluttered in the salty breeze. Traders loaded baskets of olives, figs, and fragrant cedar wood, preparing to sail for distant markets. The coastline was narrow, barely a day's walk from sea to mountain, but its people were wide in ambition. 2. The Phoenicians were not bound by their geography, they were liberated by it. The absence of fertile farmland drove them to innovate as shipbuilders, merchants, and navigators. Each harbor was a gateway, each voyage an opportunity to turn scarcity into abundance. To the west lay unknown islands and foreign shores. To the east, the great kingdoms of Mesopotamia awaited their goods. This position, between mighty empires and the wide blue, made Phoenicia a natural middleman of the ancient world. Their earliest settlements were modest, clusters of stone houses near the shore, small temples to Melkart, Astarte, and Baal Hamon. Yet even in these humble beginnings, one could hear the creak of wooden hulls and the cry of gulls. Dut, circling above the docks, the sounds of a people destined for maritime greatness. Generations of experience on the waves bred an instinct for navigation. Phoenician sailors learned the moods of the wind, the pull of currents, and the dance of stars overhead. They would become the first to link distant cultures into a vast web of exchange, not through conquest, but through trade. The narrow shores of Phoenicia were more than a home. They were a launchpad into history, a place where scarcity birthed innovation, and where the restless heartbeat of the sea echoed in every child's lullaby. Here began the story of the purple traders. What Phoenicia was never a single kingdom under one crown. Instead, it was a chain of independent city-states, each a jewel along the coast, bound by the sea, yet fiercely proud of its autonomy. Among them, Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos shone the brightest. Byblos, the oldest, was a hub of cedar trade since the dawn of recorded history. Its ties to Egypt ran deep. Ships heavy with timber sailed south, returning with papyrus, gold, and luxury goods. The city's markets bustled with artisans, carving ivory and shaping precious metals, while scribes recorded transactions in scripts that would evolve into something revolutionary. Sidon, often called the City of Glass, was famed for its skilled craftsmen. Here, Molten sand was transformed into delicate vessels that caught the light like captured sunlight. Sidon's docks were alive with the clamor of merchants, sailors, and laborers, loading amphorae of wine, jars of olive oil, and bolts of dyed fabric bound for distant shores. Tyre, the island fortress, was both a merchant capital and a bastion of defense. Its double harbors allowed ships to enter from any wind, and its massive walls rose directly from the sea, defying. Tyre's rulers were master diplomats, balancing alliances with powerful empires while ensuring their city remained a beacon of prosperity. These city-states were rivals in trade, but allies in culture. Each guarded its secrets, the recipes for dyes, the sources of rare goods, the maps to far-off ports, yet they also shared a language, a pantheon of gods, and an unshakable bond with the sea. From sunrise to dusk, the harbors were a living theater. Merchants shouting prices, flexing, porters hauling cargo, sailors mending rigging, and fishmongers hawking their morning catch. The mingling scents of salt air, cedar wood, and exotic spices spoke of journeys already taken and voyages yet to come. Though they competed fiercely, the strength of Phoenicia lay in this mosaic of cities. Their collective influence reached far beyond their narrow homeland, weaving a network of trade and cultural exchange that would endure for centuries. Together, Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos became the heartbeat of a civilization destined to sail into legend. The sea was more than a boundary for the Phoenicians. It was the heart of their existence. From their earliest days, the people of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos looked to the horizon not with fear, but with curiosity. The narrow strip of land they called home could not sustain them through agriculture alone. The mountains pressed from the east, the sea stretched endlessly west, and so they embraced the waves as their fields and the winds as their plow. Children grew up listening to the creak of hulls in the harbor and the rhythmic slap of waves against the pier. Their lullabies were sea shanties, their toys miniature boats carved from driftwood. Fathers taught sons and daughters alike to read the stars, predict the weather by the scent of the wind, and recognize the voices of distant ports carried in the cries of passing sailors. The earliest Phoenician vessels were small fishing boats, but necessity and ambition transformed them into swift, sturdy ships capable of crossing the Mediterranean. Shipwrights experimented with hull shapes, oar arrangements, and sail designs, slowly mastering the balance between speed, capacity, and stability. The sea became their great connector. Where other civilizations saw isolation, the Phoenicians saw opportunity, a path to new markets, alliances, and discoveries. Their maritime culture was not born of luxury, but of survival and the hunger for more. They learned to sail by hugging the coastlines, venturing further each season, until they dared the open waters, guided by constellations that became trusted companions. Trade soon replaced farming as the backbone of their economy. Their ships carried cedar logs to Egypt, silver from Spain, tin from Britain, and spices from the East. Alongside goods came stories, music, technologies, and even new gods, absorbed and adapted into the Phoenician pantheon. Over time, the rhythm of life became inseparable from the rhythm of the tides. The call of gulls signaled the arrival of foreign ships. The scent of tar and salt was as familiar as the smell of bread baking in the oven. Every Phoenician child knew that their destiny was written not in the soil, but in the waves. This was the birth of a maritime culture, a transformation that would propel the Phoenicians from humble coastal towns into the role of history's greatest sea traders. For the Phoenicians, the sea and the sky were not just elements, they were realms of divine power. Every wave, every gust of wind, and every star in the night sky was a message from the gods. Before setting sail, captains would kneel at stone altars, offering incense, wine, or even a portion of their cargo to win the favor of celestial and oceanic deities. Melkart, the guardian of Tyre, was more than a patron god. He was the embodiment of kingship, strength, and exploration. His temples stood on promontories overlooking the water, so his watchful gaze could follow every ship that left harbor. Astarte, goddess of fertility and love, was invoked for safe passage and prosperous trade, her image often carved into the prows of ships to protect sailors from storms. The Phoenicians also honored Baal Hamon, the god of the sky and seasons, whose cycles determined the best times to sail. Star charts carved into temple walls acted as guides for navigators, blending religion with practical seamanship. The Polestar, Orion's belt, and the Pleiades were not mere constellations. They were the eyes and symbols of the divine. Harbors doubled as sacred spaces. Shrines and small sanctuaries lined the quays, so sailors could give thanks immediately upon returning from long voyages. When storms tore ships apart, survivors would bring offerings to Yam, the primordial sea god, in gratitude for their lives. Religious festivals often began in the temples and ended on the docks. Processions carried statues of the gods down to the waterfront, where priests would bless the ships with water from sacred springs. The blending of religion and navigation was seamless. Faith was not separate from daily work, but the very wind that filled their sails. In the minds of the Phoenicians, no voyage was ever just a business trip. It was a spiritual journey, watched over by the sea and sky, and by the gods who ruled them both. Among all the treasures the Phoenicians carried across the Mediterranean, none was more coveted or more mysterious than Tyrian purple. This deep, almost regal hue was so rare that it was worth more than its weight in gold. To wear it was to declare power, prestige, and wealth beyond measure. Kings draped themselves in it, priests conducted rituals in it, and generals rode into battle cloaked in it. But how it was made was a closely guarded secret. The source was humble. A small sea snail, the murex, found clinging to the rocky shores near Tyre and Sidon. Each snail contained only a drop of the precious dye. To produce even a single garment required thousands of shells. The process was laborious and foul-smelling, involving the rotting of snail glands in large vats before the liquid was carefully heated and transformed into a dye that would bind permanently to cloth. The work was done in hidden workshops, their walls sealed against curious eyes. The smell alone could reveal their location, so dye makers often worked in secluded coves outside the cities. Apprentices swore oaths of secrecy, for the formula was as valuable as gold and as sacred as a temple rite. Merchants knew the value of the color not just in its rarity, but in the way it never faded. Sun, salt, and time only deepened its richness. The Greeks called it phoenix, the color of blood and flame, and from that word came Phoenician, forever tying the people to their most famous product. Ships from Tyre sailed to every corner of the known world, carrying bolts of purple cloth. In foreign courts, it became a status symbol reserved for royalty, and in some places, laws forbade anyone but the king from wearing it. The dye's reputation became so legendary that, even after the fall of the Phoenician cities, Tyrian purple remained the color of emperors for centuries. This mastery of a secret craft elevated the Phoenicians from skilled traders to cultural influencers. Their purple was more than a dye. It was a statement, a legacy, and a symbol that their influence had seeped into the very fabric of civilization. The Phoenicians were not empire builders in the traditional sense. They did not conquer by sword, but by sail. Their empire was made of trade winds, safe harbors, and agreements sealed over amphorae of wine. From the narrow shores of their homeland, they expanded across the Mediterranean, weaving a web of commerce so vast that their ships became a common sight in ports from Egypt to Iberia. They carried cedar wood, prized for shipbuilding and temples, glassware, as delicate as captured sunlight, metals like copper, silver, and tin, ivory from Africa, and the famous Tyrian purple cloth. In return, they brought home grain from Egypt, spices from Arabia, wine from Greece, and silver from the mines of Spain. The key to their success lay in adaptability. Wherever they docked, the Phoenicians learned the local customs, languages, and trade practices. A Phoenician merchant could bargain in Egyptian, debate in Greek, and converse in Aramaic, all before the sun set. Their ships were floating markets, laden not only with goods but also with stories, songs, and news from distant lands. Unlike other powers, the Phoenicians often preferred negotiation over conflict. They formed partnerships with local rulers, sometimes offering luxury goods or naval assistance in exchange for trade rights. In this way, their influence spread without armies, their presence welcomed rather than resisted. Markets in Phoenician ports reflected this cultural melting pot. You could hear the deep voice of an Egyptian grain trader haggling with a Sidonian glassmaker, or see a Greek artisan examining ivory carvings from Africa. The docks were alive with color, sound, and scent. The clinking of scales, the flutter of sails, the spice-laden air mixing with the salt breeze. By the height of their power, the Phoenicians had become the undisputed masters of maritime trade. They didn't just sell goods, they connected civilizations, turning the Mediterranean into a single, bustling marketplace. Their roots would later be followed by Greeks and Romans, but it was the Phoenicians who had drawn the map. Every Phoenician ship was a floating story, each crate and amphora carrying not just goods, but the history of 1,000 hands. When their merchant vessels set sail, they carried the essence of multiple civilizations in their holds, stitching together distant lands through the rhythm of trade. From the cedar forests of Lebanon came massive timber logs, straight and strong, perfect for building temples, palaces, and ships. Egyptian pharaohs prized them, exchanging gold, grain, and luxury items for these enduring trees. Stacked neatly on decks, their scent mingled with the salty sea air. Glassware was another Phoenician marvel. Sidonian artisans transformed molten sand into shimmering goblets, vases, and beads. These items glinted like captured starlight and were treasured from the Aegean to the Nile. Alongside glass, they carried intricate ivory carvings, often depicting mythic creatures or floral designs, sourced from Africa and Asia. Metals flowed in both directions. From the west came silver from Spain and tin from Britain, essential for making bronze. From Cyprus came copper, shipped in heavy ingots. The Phoenicians also traded fine textiles, none more prestigious than Tyrian purple-dyed cloth, a symbol of royal authority. But it wasn't just tangible goods. Spices from Arabia, frankincense and myrrh from the southern coasts, and wine from the vineyards of Greece found their way into Phoenician hulls. Exotic animals, rare shells, and even live plants traveled as gifts to foreign rulers, further cementing alliances. Each harbor stop added to the ship's story. In Egypt, they loaded grain to feed distant colonies. In North Africa, they took on exotic pelts. In Sicily, they traded for honey and ceramics. No two voyages were alike, and each cargo reflected the ever-changing demands of the ancient world. To see a Phoenician ship dock was to witness a parade of the known world's wonders. Locals gathered not just to buy, but to marvel, to touch the smooth glass, breathe in the spice-laden air, and imagine the far-off lands these treasures had seen. Through this constant exchange, the Phoenicians didn't just move goods. They moved ideas, art styles, technologies, and beliefs. Their cargo was civilization itself, carried from port to port, reshaping cultures in their wake. In the world of the Phoenicians, the clinking of coins was rare. Trade was a dance of barter and diplomacy, a subtle game where goods, favors, and trust held more value than minted currency. The Phoenicians mastered this game, becoming not just merchants, but negotiators, linguists, and cultural chameleons. When a Phoenician ship docked in a foreign port, its crew would not rush to unload. Instead, the captain and lead merchants would disembark in their finest robes, carrying samples of their cargo. They presented gifts, a bolt of purple cloth, a delicate glass cup, a carved ivory trinket, not as payment, but as a token of respect. This first gesture often opened doors to the city's elite, allowing negotiations to take place in private chambers rather than the public market. The Phoenicians were polyglots, often fluent in 5 or more languages. This skill allowed them to avoid the misunderstandings that could lead to insult or conflict. They knew the right titles to use for Egyptian scribes, the correct gestures of respect for Greek magistrates, and the symbols that pleased Babylonian priests. Barter itself was an intricate ritual. In some ports, a deal might be sealed with a handshake, in others, a shared cup of wine. The Phoenicians learned to adapt, offering a surplus of one item to gain favor for a more valuable trade later. They often acted as middlemen between cultures that distrusted each other, bridging gaps through charm and reliability. Diplomacy also extended to alliances. Phoenician merchants might offer free passage for a local ruler's envoy, or carry messages between kings. In times of tension, they served as neutral messengers. Their ships granted safe harbor even in politically volatile regions. Their reputation for fairness was their greatest asset. A Phoenician captain who broke a promise would find ports closed to him across the sea. But one who honored every deal could trade freely from Cyprus to Spain, his name known and respected by rulers and commoners alike. In this way, the Phoenicians built more than trade routes. They built relationships. And in a world where storms, pirates, and political upheavals could end a voyage in disaster, relationships were the truest form of wealth, a semsicoshen. Long before maps were drawn on parchment, the Phoenicians carried the first shipping routes in their minds, etched into memory by the stars, the winds, and the contours of coastlines. They did not have the empire-wide road systems of Rome, but they had something just as powerful, a maritime network that linked every shore of the Mediterranean. The earliest routes hugged the Levantine coast, sailing north toward Cyprus, where copper and timber awaited. From there, ships would cross to the southern coast of Anatolia, stopping at small ports for rest and resupply. To the south, Phoenician vessels sailed along the coast of Egypt, trading cedar for grain and gold. Westward routes followed the North African shoreline, hopping from port to port until reaching the great settlements of Carthage and beyond. The western Mediterranean held treasures worth the risk of longer journeys. Silver from the mines of Iberia, tin from the far shores of Britain, and fine pottery from the Greek Isles. These voyages required open-sea crossings, sometimes lasting days without sight of land. To navigate, sailors relied on the positions of the stars, the color of the water, and the flight patterns of seabirds. Seasonal winds dictated the calendar. In summer, the prevailing westerlies carried ships from the Levant toward the western Mediterranean. In winter, calmer seas and easterly winds allowed for the return journey. The Phoenicians knew these cycles so well that they could predict with precision when to depart, avoiding the storms that could splinter even the strongest hulls. Harbors became essential waypoints. Some were permanent settlements, others were little more than hidden coves known only to Phoenician captains. These secret anchorages offered fresh water, shelter, and a place to repair sails before venturing further. By the height of their influence, Phoenician shipping routes extended from the shores of present-day Lebanon and Israel to the Strait of Gibraltar, and possibly beyond into the Atlantic. Their network was so reliable that goods could pass from one end of the Mediterranean to the other in just a few months, changing hands multiple times, but always flowing along the web the Phoenicians had spun. These first shipping routes were not merely paths through water. They were arteries of civilization, carrying wealth, culture, and ideas between worlds that might otherwise have remained strangers. For the Phoenicians, the horizon was never a limit. It was an invitation. Long after other sailors turned back at the edge of familiar waters, Phoenician captains pushed forward, guided by stars, wind, and instinct. These voyages were not reckless. They were calculated risks, fueled by the promise of profit and the lure of discovery. Before departure, the ship's navigators studied the season's winds and tides, mapping a mental course across vast stretches of water. Supplies were loaded with precision, amphorae of fresh water, salted fish, hard bread, and dried fruits for the crew. Every rope, sail, and oar was checked, for once the shoreline vanished, there would be no second chances. When land finally slipped beneath the horizon, the sea became their only companion. The crew worked in shifts, some steering by the position of the sun and stars, others manning the oars when the wind fell silent. At night, the sky transformed into a celestial chart. Orion, the Great Bear, and the North Star were as familiar to them as the harbors they called home. Storms were the greatest test. Dark clouds could gather without warning, the wind shifting violently as waves pounded the hull. In such moments, the captain's orders were sharp and quick: reef the sails, secure the cargo, and ride the storm rather than fight it. Survival depended on discipline and trust, yet beyond danger lay reward. New islands emerged from the mist, their shores lined with unfamiliar trees. Foreign ports offered goods unseen in the Levant: gleaming metals, fragrant spices, exotic animals. Every discovery expanded their mental map of the world, each voyage adding another link in the chain of trade. So, sailing beyond the horizon was not merely an act of commerce. It was a declaration that the sea belonged to those brave enough to master it. And for the Phoenicians, the horizon was never the end. It was simply the beginning of the next journey. The Phoenicians were not just sailors and traders. They were planters of cities. Wherever their ships found fertile opportunities, they left behind more than cargo. They left communities. These settlements were the colonies of the Phoenician world, linked not by political rule, but by blood, trade, and culture. The most famous of these was Carthage, founded by settlers from Tyre in the 9th century BCE. Legend tells of Queen Dido, who fled Tyre with loyal followers and built a new city on the North African coast. Positioned on a natural harbor, Carthage quickly became a hub of commerce, rivaling the wealth of its mother cities. But Carthage was only one jewel in a necklace of colonies. Across the Mediterranean, Phoenician outposts dotted the coasts: Gades, modern Cadiz in Spain, Mocha in Sicily, Lixus in Morocco, and Kishan in Cyprus. Each was strategically chosen for access to resources, fresh water, and safe anchorage. Colonies served multiple purposes. They were refueling stations for long voyages, warehouses for goods, and markets for trade with local populations. They also acted as cultural bridges, where Phoenician architecture, language, and religious practices mingled with local traditions. Temples to Melkart or Astarte stood beside markets, selling both native and imported goods. These settlements were self-sufficient, but maintained deep ties to their homeland. Ships sailed regularly between the colonies and the Phoenician coast, carrying messages, goods, and sometimes reinforcements in times of trouble. A colony might be hundreds of miles away, but its people still celebrated the festivals of Tyre or Sidon and sent offerings back to their ancestral temples. The success of this network meant that Phoenician trade was not limited by the distance a single ship could travel. A merchant could sail from Tyre to Carthage, exchange goods, and see them continue westward on another vessel without ever leaving the colony's harbor. By the height of their expansion, the Phoenicians had created a web of ports and colonies stretching from the Levant to the Atlantic. These outposts ensured that their ships were never far from friendly waters, and that their influence reached shores they might never personally see. For the Phoenicians, Egypt was more than a trading partner. It was a gateway to an ancient world of wealth, culture, and innovation. From the earliest days of Byblos, cedar logs floated down to Egyptian ports in long, graceful convoys. In return came gold, papyrus, linen, and finely crafted jewelry that shimmered like the desert sun. The relationship was as old as history itself. Egyptian records from the Old Kingdom mention Byblos as a favored source of cedar for temples and royal tombs. These timbers were essential for Egypt's monumental architecture, resistant to the rot that plagued native woods. By the time of the New Kingdom, Phoenician ships had become familiar sights along the Nile Delta, their sails billowing against the hot, dry wind. Trade was not the only exchange. Phoenician sailors returned home with Egyptian artistry, technology, and religious symbols. Scarabs, lotus motifs, and falcon-headed deities began appearing in Phoenician jewelry and pottery. In turn, Phoenician glasswork and metalcraft found their way into Egyptian palaces, prized for their exotic designs and rich colors. Diplomacy was handled with as much care as the goods themselves. Phoenician envoys brought gifts of rare incense, fine fabrics, and even exotic animals to curry favor with the pharaoh. Egyptian officials often reciprocated with lavish hospitality, hosting banquets where merchants dined beside nobles, under painted ceilings that depicted the night sky. The Nile trade was also a vital link. In longer maritime routes, goods from Africa and the Red Sea entered Egyptian markets, where Phoenician traders could acquire them for transport across the Mediterranean. This made Egypt not only a source of luxury goods, but also a key distribution hub in a vast commercial web. Yet, there was always a delicate balance. Egyptian power could be as dangerous as it was alluring. A misstep in protocol or a poorly timed voyage during political unrest could see a merchant's cargo seized or his crew detained. But the rewards outweighed the risks, and for centuries, the Phoenicians maintained a steady flow of trade with the land of the pharaohs. This enduring partnership between two great civilizations enriched them both. Egypt gained the wood and craftsmanship it could not produce, and the Phoenicians tapped into the wealth and influence of one of the most advanced cultures of the ancient world. When Phoenician sails first appeared on Greek horizons, they brought with them goods, ideas, and stories that would forever change the Aegean. To the Greeks, these master traders from the East were both valuable partners and formidable rivals. The early encounters were centered on trade. The Greeks coveted Phoenician goods, shimmering glass, finely worked ivory, and above all, the deep Tyrian purple dye that crowned kings and adorned temples. In return, the Phoenicians took home olive oil, wine, and exquisite Greek pottery, whose painted designs found their way into Phoenician homes and temples. But trade was only part of the story. Cultural exchange flowed in both directions. Greek craftsmen adapted Phoenician decorative motifs, such as lotus flowers and winged sphinxes, while Phoenician artisans borrowed from Greek geometry and myth. Some historians believe that the Greek alphabet itself evolved from the Phoenician script, adapted to suit the sounds of the Greek language. There were also moments of tension. The two peoples competed for control of key trade routes and harbors, especially in the western Mediterranean. Greek colonies in Sicily and southern Italy often stood opposite Phoenician settlements, their markets vying for the same customers. Yet despite the rivalry, there was mutual respect. Greek poets wrote of Phoenician seamanship, admiring their ability to navigate across vast distances. In Greek ports, Phoenician traders were often welcomed as honored guests, for their ships carried not only luxury goods, but also news from distant lands. The mingling of these cultures enriched both civilizations. Greek myths began to feature Phoenician characters, most famously, the story of Europa, the Phoenician princess carried off by Zeus. In the other direction, Phoenician temples sometimes incorporated Greek-style columns, blending Eastern and Western architectural traditions. By the classical era, the Phoenicians and Greeks had woven a complex relationship, sometimes trading side by side, sometimes clashing over territory, but always influencing one another in ways that would echo for centuries. The Mediterranean was not a barrier between them, but a shared stage where commerce, culture, and competition played out in an endless dance. The Phoenicians were masters of known waters, but their legacy also drifts into the mists of legend, freed Tiri Ficti, carried by whispers of voyages that reached far beyond the Mediterranean. Some of these journeys are recorded in ancient chronicles, others in folklore, passed from sailor to sailor over firelit decks. Greek historians told of Phoenician expeditions that skirted the edges of the world. One tale describes a voyage commissioned by the Egyptian pharaoh Necho II in the 6th century BCE, where Phoenician crews supposedly sailed around the entire continent of Africa. According to Herodotus, the sailors claimed that, while circumnavigating, they saw the sun rise on their right, proof that they had crossed into the southern hemisphere. Whether true or embellished, it speaks to the daring scope of their seamanship. Other legends push even further. Some believe the Phoenicians reached the British Isles in search of tin, a vital component for making bronze. The rich mines of Cornwall may have been a guarded secret, with Phoenician captains keeping their roots hidden from rivals. There are also tantalizing theories, though unproven, that Phoenician ships may have ventured into the Atlantic, possibly touching the shores of West Africa, or even crossing toward the mysterious lands beyond. Closer to home, they explored every island and inlet of the Mediterranean. From Cyprus to Sardinia, from Sicily to Malta, Phoenician sailors mapped coastlines and currents with unmatched precision. Their navigational charts were rarely committed to parchment, so instead they lived in the memories of seasoned captains, passed to apprentices through years of shared voyages. These long journeys were not solely about trade. Some expeditions were scouting missions, seeking safe harbors and fertile sites for future colonies. Others were diplomatic ventures, forging alliances with rulers in distant lands. And still others were pure exploration, the simple, human urge to see what lay beyond the horizon. Over time, the boundaries between history and myth blurred. The Phoenicians themselves may have encouraged such stories, Phoenicians, knowing that a reputation for reaching anywhere and everywhere made them seem all the more powerful and mysterious to friends and rivals alike. Whether all these legends are true matters less than the fact that they were believed, for in the ancient world, belief in a people's reach could be as valuable as their actual deeds. The Phoenicians were not just traders of goods, they were traders of tales, and their stories sailed as far as their ships. Ibunding among all the treasures the Phoenicians traded: cedar, glass, purple cloth. None was as transformative as a set of simple symbols that could fit on a clay tablet. This was the Phoenician alphabet, a system of writing so efficient and adaptable that it reshaped the way the ancient world communicated. Before the Phoenicians, writing systems like Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform were complex, requiring hundreds of symbols to master. Such scripts were the domain of trained scribes, limiting literacy to a privileged few. The Phoenicians changed that. They reduced writing to just Arsarar characters, each representing a single consonant sound. No pictograms, no sprawling signs, just a streamlined code that could be learned quickly by merchants, sailors, and artisans alike. The genius of their alphabet lay in its simplicity. It was perfectly suited for recording trade agreements, ship manifests, and contracts, but it also carried stories, songs, and religious texts. For a trading people who dealt with multiple languages, this adaptability was a game changer. A Phoenician merchant in Cyprus could teach the alphabet to a Greek partner, who in turn could adapt it to his own language, which is exactly what happened. Through trade and cultural exchange, the Phoenician alphabet spread across the Mediterranean. The Greeks modified it, adding, and their version eventually gave birth to the Latin script, the same letters used in much of the world today. In a sense, every time we write a word in English, Spanish, French, or dozens of other languages, we're echoing the legacy of the Phoenician scribes. In Phoenician cities, the alphabet appeared carved into stone markers, painted on pottery, and scratched into wax tablets aboard ships. It was a tool of business, but also of identity, a shared language of symbols that bound far-flung colonies to their homeland. This revolution was quiet, but its impact was vast. The Phoenicians may be remembered as the purple traders, but their true empire was one of letters, Sol, Egene, carried in the hands of every sailor, trader, and student who learned to write their signs. Long after their ships were gone, the alphabet sailed on, across time, across cultures, across the entire world. In the bustling markets of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, the clink of chisels, the hiss of molten glass, and the rhythmic beat of hammers on bronze filled the air. The Phoenicians were not only traders of luxury goods, they were the creators of them. Their artisans transformed raw materials into treasures coveted. From Egypt to Iberia, glassmaking was one of their most renowned skills. Sidonian glassmakers perfected techniques that turned grains of sand into shimmering vessels. Some were tinted with delicate colors, deep blues, emerald greens, golden ambers, while others remained crystal clear, their beauty lying in flawless form. Beads of every shade were strung into necklaces that glittered under Mediterranean sunlight, prized by queens and commoners alike. Metalwork was another Phoenician specialty. Bronze and silver were shaped into intricate jewelry, embossed plaques, and ceremonial weapons. Craftsmen often inlaid gold and ivory into their work, creating designs that blended Phoenician, Egyptian, and Mesopotamian motifs. Lotus blossoms beside winged griffins, and spirals intertwined with sun disks. Ivory carving was an art form in itself. Imported from Africa and India, the ivory was softened, carved, and polished. until it gleamed. Scenes of gods, animals, and floral patterns adorned boxes, combs, and furniture inlays. Many such pieces have been discovered in the ruins of Assyrian palaces, proof of the Phoenicians' far-reaching clientele. Shops were small but efficient, often located near the docks for easy access to imported materials and immediate export of finished goods. The work was collaborative. Glassmakers traded with jewelers, woodworkers commissioned metal fittings from smiths, and all shared techniques through a tight-knit guild-like network. What made Phoenician craftsmanship unique was its adaptability. The artisans absorbed foreign styles and fused them with their own. If trading in Egypt, they might produce goods with lotus motifs. In Greece, they might favor geometric designs. This ability to tailor products to different cultural tastes kept their work in constant demand. The reputation of Phoenician artisans was so strong that their goods often traveled further than the artisans themselves. A glass vessel made in Sidon could end up in a Celtic chieftain's hall in Gaul, while a carved ivory panel might adorn a throne in Babylon. These works were more than objects of beauty. They were ambassadors of Phoenician culture, carrying the elegance and skill of their makers to distant lands. In every carving, every bead, and every hammered plate of bronze, the story of a people who valued artistry as much as commerce was told. In every Phoenician city, the skyline was crowned not by palaces, but by temples, sacred spaces where trade, politics, and faith converged. The Phoenicians were a deeply religious people, and their devotion to the gods was etched into the stones of their cities and carried on the sails of their ships. Temples to Melkart, Astarte, and Baal Hamon stood on high ground or near the harbors, their positions chosen so that both land travelers and sailors could see them from afar. These structures were built from cut limestone and cedar beams, often decorated with brightly painted reliefs and carved columns. Bronze doors gleamed in the sunlight, and incense drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of the sea. Religious symbols were everywhere. The solar disk, representing divine power and protection, was worn as a pendant by sailors. The Tanit symbol, a triangle with a circle and horizontal line, was Tanit, carved into walls and pottery as a sign of fertility and life. Carved lions guarded temple entrances, while winged sphinxes adorned altars, blending Egyptian and Mesopotamian influences with local style. Inside the temples, sanctuaries housed sacred statues of the gods. These idols, often gilded or inlaid with precious stones, were dressed in fine garments and adorned with offerings from across the Mediterranean. The interiors were dimly lit, the glow of oil lamps reflecting off bronze and gold, creating an atmosphere both intimate and awe-inspiring. Festivals were the heartbeat of religious life. Processions wound through city streets, carrying the gods' statues to the waterfront to bless departing ships. Priests and priestesses chanted hymns while musicians played lyres and drums. Sacrifices, animals, incense, wine, and sometimes rare goods from foreign lands were offered in hopes of divine favor for trade, safe passage, and prowess. The temples were more than places of worship. They were also centers of community decision-making. Merchants met in their courtyards to finalize deals. Envoys exchanged messages under their porticos, and city elders sought divine approval before embarking on major ventures. For the Phoenicians, the sacred and the practical were inseparable. Their gods were protectors of both the soul and the ship, Basaces, and their symbols traveled as far as their trade routes extended. Stamped on amphorae, carved into coins, painted on sails. Even in distant colonies, Phoenician settlers built temples, modeled on those of Tyre and Sidon, ensuring that their gods watched over them wherever they went. And long after those temples crumbled, their symbols endured, echoing the faith of a people who believed the sea itself was a divine pathway. Long before written notes and orchestras, the Phoenicians carried their music on the wind and water. For these seafarers, music was not merely entertainment. It was a companion on long voyages, a rhythm for work, a prayer to the gods, and a thread binding the crew together. In the bustling ports of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, musicians played lyres strung with gut, flutes carved from reed, and drums made from stretched animal hides. Marketplaces pulsed with lively melodies, blending local tunes with foreign rhythms picked up in distant ports. Each market stall seemed to have its own soundtrack, a glassmaker humming as he worked, a weaver singing a lullaby while she dyed fabric, a group of sailors clapping in sync with a street drummer. On the sea, music was practical. Oarsmen rowed in time to a chanty led by a rhythmic voice at the bow, the steady beat ensuring unity of mind. These maritime songs often praised the ship, mocked the waves, or called upon Melkart or Astarte for safe passage. At night, when the stars were bright and the sea was calm, Quieter songs would drift across the deck, tales of lovers left ashore, of mythical sea creatures, or of ports yet unseen. Festivals and religious ceremonies amplified this musical culture. Temple processions were accompanied by choirs and drummers, their beats echoing against the stone walls of the city. Some songs were reserved for sacred occasions, forbidden to be sung outside the temple gates, their melodies believed to hold divine power. The Phoenicians' constant travel meant their music was never static. They borrowed scales and rhythms from Egypt, instruments from Greece, and even distant motifs from North Africa. In turn, they spread their own songs wherever they docked, leaving traces of Phoenician melodies in faraway cultures. Musical instruments themselves were valued trade goods. Beautifully carved lyres, painted drums, and polished bronze cymbals found buyers in foreign courts, where they were often played by entertainers who had never set foot on a Phoenician deck, yet unknowingly kept the seafarers' rhythms alive. For the Phoenicians, music was as essential as the sail and the oar. It marked the beat of their work, carried their prayers to the gods, and reminded them, in moments of fatigue or danger, that they were part of a living tradition, bound together by song across the vast, restless sea. Life in a Phoenician city was shaped by the rhythms of the harbor, the market, and the family hearth. While the ship sailed far and wide, the people at home enjoyed a life filled with the flavors and customs of the Mediterranean world, a blend of local traditions and influences brought back from distant lands. Cuisine was a rich mix of land and sea. The Phoenicians ate freshly caught fish, tuna, mullet, sardines, often grilled over open flames or preserved in brine for long voyages. Olives and olive oil were staples, used in cooking and as a condiment. Bread, baked from wheat or barley, was eaten daily, sometimes flavored with honey or sesame seeds. From the fertile inland valleys came figs, grapes, and pomegranates, while traders brought dates from Arabia and spices from the east. Meals were social affairs. In wealthier homes, guests reclined on cushions around low tables laden with clay bowls of stews, roasted meats, fresh fruit, and jugs of wine mixed with herbs. Common folk might gather in courtyards, sharing bread and salted fish, drinking from shared cups, while talking about the day's work. Daily life was active and vibrant. Merchants rose early to inspect goods arriving at the docks, while artisans opened their workshops. The clang of metalworkers, the hiss of glass blowers, and the chatter of weavers filling the air. Children fetched water from public fountains, or played games with carved wooden toys. Women tended gardens, spun wool, and managed household trade, while fishermen mended nets or prepared their boats for the evening's catch. Clothing was practical yet colorful. Linen tunics were common in the hot climate, while cloaks of wool provided warmth in cooler months. The wealthy displayed their status with dyed fabrics, especially purple trim, and jewelry made of gold, silver, or glass beads. Sandals were worn in the city, but barefoot walking was common along the beaches and docks. Religious devotion was woven into daily life. Small household shrines stood in many homes, where offerings of incense or bread were made to Melkart or Astarte before meals or journeys. Festivals provided a break from routine, with music, dancing, and feasts that could last for days. The scent of the sea mingled with that of baking bread, roasting fish, and perfumed oil from the markets. Phoenician cities were alive with voices speaking many languages, evidence of the constant flow of trade. It was a world where the extraordinary, goods from far-off lands, stories from exotic ports, was part of the ordinary rhythm of life. For centuries, the Phoenicians thrived under the protective canopy of the sea. Their wealth, drawn from trade and craftsmanship, gave them influence far beyond their narrow shores. But in the Joth and Bath centuries BCE, dark clouds rose from the east. The Assyrian Empire was expanding, and its armies were as relentless as the tides. The Assyrians coveted the riches of the Phoenician cities, cedar from the mountains, glass and metalwork from their workshops, and access to the ports that connected the Mediterranean to the ancient Near East. Their armies moved with terrifying speed, their chariots rumbling across the Levant, their siege engines breaking through walls that had stood for generations. The Phoenicians knew they could not match the Assyrians in open battle. Instead, they turned to diplomacy and tribute. Gold, silver, luxury goods, and even ships were sent to the Assyrian court in Nineveh as tokens of submission. In exchange, the cities retained a measure of autonomy, their harbors still open for trade. But tribute was a double-edged sword. The demands were heavy, and the cost strained merchants and craftsmen alike. Periodic rebellions flared, often crushed with brutal efficiency. The Assyrians made examples of those who resisted, raising walls and deporting populations to distant provinces. Yet, the Phoenicians endured. They adapted their trade networks to serve Assyrian needs, ferrying goods across the empire and bringing exotic wares to its markets. Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos became vital links in the Assyrian economic machine. Their ships carrying grain from Egypt, timber from Lebanon, and precious metals from the west. Still, the threat was constant. Assyrian envoys arrived regularly, not as guests but as overseers, their eyes and ears attuned to any sign of defiance. The proud independence of the Phoenician city-states was dimmed, yet never extinguished. They survived by balancing compliance with quiet resilience, preserving their culture while navigating the demands of empire. This uneasy coexistence would last for over a century, shaping the political and economic landscape of Phoenicia. The Assyrian threat was a reminder that even the masters of the sea were not beyond the reach of land-born empires, and that survival sometimes meant bending with the wind rather than breaking against it. In the early 6th century BCE, Tyre, the jewel of the Phoenician coast, faced a new and formidable adversary, Nebuchadnezzar II, the mighty king of Babylon. His empire stretched across Mesopotamia, and now his eyes turned westward toward the fortified island city that controlled the sea lanes and the lucrative trade flowing through them. Nebuchadnezzar's armies descended upon the mainland coast opposite Tyre, capturing the surrounding towns and farmlands. But the true heart of the city lay on its offshore island, protected by massive stone walls that rose directly from the sea. To reach it, the Babylonians would have to do the impossible, cross water under enemy fire. The siege began with the cutting of supply lines. Babylonian forces controlled the coast, preventing food, water, and reinforcements from reaching Tyre by land. Yet the Tyrians had the sea, and their ships continued to slip through blockades, bringing supplies as months turned into years. The Babylonian army built siege towers along the shoreline, their archers firing across the narrow channel. They constructed floating rafts and assault barges, but Tyre's defenders met each attempt with a hail of arrows and stones hurled from catapults. The city's war galleys raided enemy positions, burning siege equipment and sinking supply barges. The siege dragged on for 13 years, a testament to Tyre's resilience and the Babylonians' determination. Life inside the city was difficult, but the people endured, rationing food and keeping morale alive through religious festivals and communal defense. On the mainland, Babylonian soldiers built a semi-permanent camp, their tents and siege works becoming a fixture of the coast. Trace. In the end, a negotiated settlement was reached. Tyre acknowledged Babylonian overlordship and agreed to pay tribute, but it retained much of its autonomy. Nebuchadnezzar could claim a symbolic victory, while the Tyrians could claim they had never been fully conquered. The siege of Tyre became a legend, a story of endurance against overwhelming odds. It showed the world that while Tyre could be pressured, starved, and forced into diplomacy, it would not be broken. A lesson future conquerors would learn and often underestimate. In the mid-6th century BCE, the balance of power in the Near East shifted once again. The Babylonian Empire fell, and the vast Achaemenid Persian Empire rose under Cyrus the Great. For the Phoenicians, this new reality brought both challenges and opportunities. The Persians, unlike the Babylonians, saw the Phoenician cities not merely as subjects to be taxed, but as valuable partners. They recognized that Phoenician naval expertise could serve imperial ambitions, particularly in controlling the eastern Mediterranean and securing supply lines for military campaigns. Under Persian rule, the city-states of Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and Arwad retained a significant degree of autonomy. Local kings continued to rule, their authority legitimized by Persian oversight. In return, they pledged loyalty, paid tribute, and, most importantly, provided ships and crews for the great king's navy. This alliance proved critical during the Persian wars against Greece. Phoenician fleets ferried troops, escorted supply ships, and fought in major battles, such as the Persian attempt to conquer the Greek mainland. Their fast, maneuverable galleys were highly prized, and Phoenician mariners were considered among the finest sailors in the empire. Economically, the Persian era brought stability and expanded markets. Phoenician merchants gained access to the vast Persian trade network, stretching from the Indus Valley to Egypt. Exotic goods from Central Asia, spices from India, and fine textiles from Persia itself flowed into Phoenician ports, where they were resold across the Mediterranean. Culturally, the period was one of fusion. Persian administrative practices blended with Phoenician local governance, and Persian artistic motifs, winged lions, lotus flowers, and elaborate robes, began appearing in Phoenician temples and luxury goods. In return, the Persians adopted aspects of Phoenician ship design and maritime logistics. Still, loyalty to the empire was not without strain. Heavy demands for ships and manpower during prolonged campaigns could disrupt local economies. Some Phoenician cities, notably Sidon, would later chafe under Persian control, leading to rebellion. But in the early centuries of Persian rule, the relationship was largely cooperative, benefiting both sides. For the Phoenicians, the Persian era was a reminder of their greatest strength, adaptability. Whether under Egyptian, Assyrian, Babylonian, or Persian overlordship, they found ways to protect their cities, preserve their culture, and turn imperial demands into opportunities for profit. While the Phoenicians were famed as traders, they were equally formidable as naval warriors. Centuries of navigating the unpredictable Mediterranean gave them an instinct for the sea, and when war came, their merchant galleys could be refitted into swift, deadly warships. The Phoenician bireme, with its 2 tiers of oarsmen and reinforced hull, was the pride of their fleets. Agile and fast, it could ram an enemy vessel with a bronze-sheathed prow, or outmaneuver heavier ships with sharp, sudden turns. The Phoenicians mastered the art of striking quickly, senens, crippling an opponent's mobility before moving in for the kill or capture. One key tactic was the déplacement, breaking through an enemy's line of ships and then turning to strike from the side or rear, where defenses. They also used the périplus, encircling a slower fleet and forcing it toward the shore or into a trap. These maneuvers required precise timing and flawless coordination between rowers, helmsmen, and captains. In battle, archers stationed on deck rained arrows and javelins down on enemy crews. Slingers, using smooth stones gathered from riverbeds, targeted officers and helmsmen. Some ships carried jars of burning pitch, hurled onto enemy decks to spread chaos and fire. Naval warfare was not only about brute force. Phoenician captains were masters of deception. They sometimes disguised war galleys as harmless merchant vessels, luring pirates or enemy scouts into a trap. In other cases, they feigned retreat, drawing enemies into narrow straits where hidden ships lay in wait. Under Persian command during the Greco-Persian Wars, Phoenician fleets played crucial roles at battles like Salamis. Although the Persians were defeated there, Greek historians noted the skill and discipline of the Phoenician crews. In earlier conflicts against rival city-states or pirates, their ability to coordinate multiple squadrons over long distances was unmatched. Even in defeat, they rarely lost their fleets entirely. Their knowledge of hidden coves, shifting currents, and wind patterns often allowed them to slip away and regroup. This was the same seamanship that made them legendary traders, now turned to the business of survival and victory. The sea was their battlefield, and on it, they combined the precision of artisans, the adaptability of merchants, and the cunning of diplomats. To fight the Phoenicians on water was to face opponents who understood that the ocean itself could be a weapon. By the 6th century BCE, a new star was rising in the Phoenician world. Carthage, founded by settlers from Tyre, this North African city began as a strategic trading post, but quickly grew into a thriving metropolis, commanding the rich maritime routes of the Western Mediterranean. Carthage's location was its greatest asset. Nestled in a natural harbor on the Gulf of Tunis, it sat at the crossroads between the eastern and western seas. From here, Carthaginian ships could reach Spain, Sicily, Sardinia, and even the Atlantic coast of Africa with ease. It became the linchpin of Phoenician trade beyond the Strait of Gibraltar. As Tyre and the other homeland cities increasingly faced pressure from empires like Babylon and Persia, Carthage took on the role of guardian and leader for Phoenician colonies in the West. It organized mutual defense pacts, coordinated trade networks, and even established new settlements of its own. Economically, Carthage was a powerhouse. Its markets bustled with goods from across 3 continents: silver from Iberia, tin from Britain, grain from North Africa, fine pottery from Etruria, and, of course, Tyrian purple and Sidonian glass. Carthaginian merchants were as shrewd as their ancestors, mastering both diplomacy and competition. Culturally, Carthage remained distinctly Phoenician. Its temples were dedicated to Melkart, Astarte, and Baal Hamon, and its ships bore the same design traditions perfected in Tyre. Yet Carthage also developed its own identity, blending local Berber influences into its art, architecture, and military traditions. Militarily, Carthage maintained one of the strongest navies in the Mediterranean. Its fleets patrolled the seas, protecting trade routes from pirates and rival powers. It also invested heavily, knowing that control of the sea was useless if the city itself could not be held. In time, Carthage's power would rival that of any ancient state, a Phoenician heart beating in a new body. While the cities of the homeland remained important cultural and spiritual centers, Carthage became the political and economic capital of the Western Phoenician world. The sea, the place from which the purple traders would project their influence for centuries to come. By the 5th century BCE, the Mediterranean was changing. The once distant Greek city-states had grown into powerful maritime players, and their merchant fleets now plied the same waters the Phoenicians had long dominated. With colonies stretching from Asia Minor to southern Italy, the Greeks began to challenge Phoenician supremacy in trade, culture, and navy. At first, competition was subtle. Greek merchants appeared more frequently in western ports, offering pottery, olive oil, and wine of exceptional quality. Greek artisans, inspired by Phoenician craftsmanship, developed their own styles, which in turn attracted foreign buyers. Slowly, Greek goods began to rival those from Tyre, Sidon, and Carthage in desirability. Politically, Greek expansion was backed by growing naval power. Athens, in particular, emerged as a formidable force, building a fleet that could not only protect its merchants but also project power across the Aegean and into the central Mediterranean. In Sicily and southern Italy, Greek colonies came into direct competition with Phoenician settlements, leading to periods of tension and occasional skirmishes. The cultural influence of the Greeks also posed a challenge. Their language, philosophy, and artistic ideals spread along their trade routes, drawing the admiration of other peoples, including some Phoenician allies. While the Phoenicians had once been the chief transmitters of culture between East and West, they now found themselves sharing and sometimes losing that role. Yet, the Phoenicians did not vanish from the stage. Carthage, in particular, took up the mantle of defending Western trade routes, forging alliances with Iberian tribes and North African kingdoms to counter Greek moves. Naval encounters between Carthaginian and Greek fleets became a regular feature of Mediterranean politics. Still, the momentum was shifting. The Greek ascendancy marked the beginning of a new balance of power in the Mediterranean, one in which the Phoenicians were no longer the undisputed masters of the sea. Instead, they had to adapt, focusing on maintaining key ports, safeguarding vital trade routes, and protecting their cultural identity in a rapidly changing world. For the Phoenicians, this was a reminder that dominance, like the tide, could never be permanent. But it was also a test of resilience, one they had faced before, and one they were determined to endure again. By the 3rd century BCE, the balance of the Mediterranean was once again on the move. In the West, a new power was emerging: Rome. What had begun as a modest city-state on the Italian peninsula had grown into a disciplined military and political machine, steadily expanding its influence through conquest and alliances. At first, Rome's reach was felt only indirectly by the Phoenicians. Roman merchants began appearing in markets once dominated by Greek and Carthaginian traders. They brought goods from the Italian heartland: wine, olive oil, ceramics, and iron tools, and sought access to the lucrative trade routes that connected the western Mediterranean to the east. Feral, Carthage, now the leading Phoenician power, recognized Rome's growing ambition. At times, the two powers cooperated. Treaties were signed to divide spheres of influence, Rome controlling much of the Italian coastline, Carthage dominating the waters around North Africa, Sardinia, and parts of Spain. For a time, these agreements kept the peace, and trade even flourished between the two. But beneath the diplomacy lay an undercurrent of rivalry. Rome's military strength was growing rapidly, fueled by a network of loyal allies and a citizen army unmatched in discipline. Carthage, meanwhile, commanded one of the largest navies in the world and had built a commercial empire that Rome increasingly envied. Frictions emerged over strategic locations, especially Sicily. The crossroads of the central Mediterranean, Greek colonies there had long been a point of contention between Carthage and Greece. But now Rome entered the struggle, determined to control the island's fertile land and key harbors. The Phoenician homeland, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, watched from afar. Though no longer the central seat of power, these cities still maintained cultural and economic ties with Carthage. The rise of Rome was a reminder that the Mediterranean was an ever-changing arena where alliances could shift as quickly as the winds at sea. As tensions between Rome and Carthage mounted, the stage was set for conflicts that would shake the ancient world. For the Phoenician legacy, it would be the ultimate test. Could their greatest western city withstand the ambitions of an empire whose power was still growing? The uneasy peace between Carthage and Rome did not last. By the mid-3rd century BCE, tensions over control of Sicily erupted into the First Punic War, a conflict that would span more than 2 decades and mark the beginning of a century-long struggle between two titans of the Mediterranean. At the heart of the conflict was trade. Sicily's fertile fields and strategic harbors were critical to controlling the central Mediterranean. Rome, with its powerful legions, dominated the land. Carthage, with its unmatched navy, ruled the sea. Each side sought to claim both. The First Punic War saw Rome build a navy from scratch, learning quickly from captured Carthaginian ships. They introduced the corvus, a boarding device that turned naval encounters into infantry battles, playing to Roman strengths. Despite Carthage's maritime skill, the war ended in Roman victory, forcing Carthage to cede Sicily and pay a heavy indemnity. Resentment simmered, setting the stage for the Second Punic War, one of the most legendary conflicts in history. This time, Carthage struck first, led by Hannibal Barca, a brilliant general who marched his army, complete with war elephants, over the Alps into Italy. For over a decade, Hannibal ravaged the Italian countryside, defeating Roman armies at battles like Cannae, where his tactics became a textbook example of military genius. Yet even Hannibal's brilliance could not secure final victory. Rome's resilience, combined with its ability to threaten Carthage directly in North Africa, forced Hannibal to return home. At the Battle of Zama in Erbeklingar BCE, Roman general Scipio Africanus defeated him, ending the Second Punic War and leaving Carthage severely weakened. The final blow came in the Third Punic War BCE. Rome, determined to remove Carthage as a rival forever, laid siege to the city. After 3 years of brutal fighting, Carthage fell. The Romans destroyed its walls, burned it to the ground, and, according to legend, salted the earth so nothing would grow. Survivors were sold into slavery, and Carthage ceased to exist as an independent state. For the Phoenician legacy, this was a devastating moment. The greatest Western outpost of their civilization had been wiped from the map, yet their influence lived on, in the ships, trade networks, and cultural traditions that Rome itself inherited. The Punic Wars were not merely battles between two powers. They were the clash of two worlds, and though Carthage fell, the memory of its defiance and brilliance at sea would echo through history. The year was Ibaitsisergiot, BCE. Carthage, once the proud queen of the Western Mediterranean, faced its most desperate hour. Rome had decided that the city, even weakened, was too dangerous to exist. The Third Punic War began, not as a contest for territory, but as an act of annihilation. Carthage had been stripped of much of its navy and empire. After the Second Punic War, yet it remained a wealthy, thriving city. Rome's demands were impossible. Surrender all weapons, evacuate the city, and resettle far inland. The Carthaginians refused. To abandon their city was to abandon their identity. The Roman legions marched on Carthage, encircling it with walls of their own to cut off any chance of relief. The siege was merciless. Carthaginians, men, women, and children, worked day and night to forge weapons from whatever they could find, melted down jewelry, iron fittings from buildings, even bronze statues from temples. Food grew scarce, and famine began to gnaw at the city. For nearly 3 years, Carthage resisted. Carthaginian warships, hastily rebuilt in secret, attempted daring raids against the Roman blockade. Citizens fought from the rooftops, hurling stones and boiling oil on attackers. Every street became a battlefield. In Ibaitsisergiot BCE, the Romans breached the city's defenses. What followed was a brutal house-to-house battle. Carthaginian defenders fought desperately, but they were outnumbered and exhausted. Fires raged through the streets, consuming homes, markets, and temples. The screams of the wounded mingled with the crash of collapsing walls. Finally, the citadel, the Bursa, fell. The surviving population was rounded up. Tens of thousands were sold into slavery. Roman soldiers looted the city, carrying off treasures that had been centuries in the making. According to later accounts, the Romans set fire to what remained and razed Carthage to the ground. Some Roman writers claimed the soil was salted to prevent anything from growing, though historians debate this. What is certain is that Carthage ceased to exist as an independent city. For the Phoenician legacy, it was a dark sunset. Yet even in destruction, the spirit of Carthage lived on in the ports and colonies that had once answered to her, and in the maritime traditions that Rome itself adopted. The fall of Carthage was not the end of Phoenician influence, but it was the end of their greatest stronghold in the west. While Carthage's ashes still smoldered in the west, the Phoenician homeland, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and Arwad, remained intact, their harbors busy, their markets full. But the Mediterranean's new master was now unmistakable, Rome. The transition from Hellenistic control to Roman rule was gradual. Following the collapse of Seleucid authority in the region during the 18th century BCE, Rome absorbed Phoenicia into its expanding provinces. The cities were granted varying degrees of autonomy. Some, like Tyre and Sidon, were declared free cities, allowed to govern themselves and retain certain privileges in exchange for loyalty and taxes. Under Rome, Phoenician ports flourished anew. The empire's vast trade network stretched from Britain to Egypt, and Phoenician merchants eagerly tapped into it. Roman roads carried goods inland, while the sea lanes, patrolled by the powerful Roman navy, were safer than they had been in centuries. Tyrian purple remained a luxury in demand, and Phoenician glassware continued to adorn elite Roman homes. Roman influence was everywhere. Stone theaters, aqueducts, and public baths appeared alongside traditional Phoenician temples. Latin inscriptions stood next to Phoenician script, and Roman coins circulated in markets where traders still spoke Punic and Aramaic. The blending of cultures was visible in art, architecture, and even religion. Phoenician gods like Melkart were identified with Roman deities such as Hercules, while Astarte was linked to Venus. The relationship with Rome was pregnant. The Phoenician cities had long practiced the art of coexistence with powerful empires, and under Rome they adapted once again. Local elites participated in Roman politics, some earning citizenship and positions of influence. In return, Rome relied on Phoenician maritime expertise, commissioning ships and sailors for imperial service. Yet the independence of old was gone. Decisions that once lay in the hands of city councils were now made in distant Rome. Taxes were fixed by imperial decree, and loyalty to the empire was non-negotiable. Even so, the Phoenician cities thrived economically, their harbors vital nodes in Rome's imperial network. By the early centuries CE, Phoenicia had become a vibrant crossroads of Roman order and Phoenician heritage. The cities remained prosperous and cosmopolitan, still echoing with the voices of traders from across the known world. The Phoenician spirit, adaptive, resilient, and ever bound to the sea, endured even as Rome's eagles flew over their gates. Long after Phoenician war galleys vanished from the sea, their greatest creation continued its voyage. The alphabet, born on the Levantine coast as a streamlined system of Ursher consonant symbols, the Phoenician script was designed for speed, clarity, and adaptability. Merchants could scratch it onto pottery shards, carve it into stone, or ink it onto papyrus with minimal training. From the moment it left Phoenician shores, the alphabet began to evolve. Greek traders, learning it from their Phoenician counterparts, added vowels, transforming the script to better suit their language. This adaptation became the Greek alphabet, the ancestor of both the Latin and Cyrillic alphabets. In Italy, the Etruscans borrowed from the Greeks, and the Romans in turn shaped the letters into the Latin script, the one still used in much of the world today. In the East, the Arameans adapted Phoenician into Aramaic, a script that would later give rise to Hebrew, Arabic, and many other writing systems. Through this branching family tree, the Phoenician alphabet became the root of most of the world's major scripts. In one form or another, its DNA is in the letters we use every day. Whether to draft treaties, write poetry, or send text, its spread was not accidental. The Phoenicians' vast trade network acted as a distribution system for more than just goods. It was a delivery route for ideas. In foreign markets, Phoenician scribes often taught local merchants how to write the letters so they could keep their own accounts. Over generations, these symbols became part of the cultural fabric of countless civilizations. Even after Phoenicia was absorbed into larger empires, the alphabet survived. Roman legions carried Latin letters across Europe. Aramaic script spread through the Middle East under Persian and later Islamic rule. And in every one of these transformations, the simple efficiency of the original Phoenician design remained. Today, few people know that the letters they use, from A to Z, from Alpha to Omega, have their roots in the script of ancient seafarers. But the Phoenicians live on in every word we write, every contract we sign, and every story we record. Their ships may have been lost to time, but their alphabet is still sailing. Across languages, across continents, across millennia, though time has eroded the walls of their cities, the architectural legacy of the Phoenicians still whispers through the stones of the Mediterranean world. From the fortified island of Tyre to the grand temples of Carthage. Their building style blended practicality with beauty, drawing on both native traditions and foreign influences gathered through centuries of trade. The Phoenicians were master stoneworkers. Their cities often featured massive ashlar masonry, large, precisely cut blocks of limestone fitted so tightly that no mortar was needed. This technique not only provided strength against earthquakes and attacks, but also influenced later builders, including the Greeks and Romans. Temple design was another lasting. Phoenician sanctuaries dedicated to Melkart, Astarte, and Baal Hamon were typically built on elevated platforms, with wide courtyards for processions and towering columns at the entrance. Decorative elements, lotus flowers, palm fronds, winged creatures, reflected the blend of Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and local styles that defined Phoenician art. These motifs would later appear in Hellenistic and Roman architecture, subtly linking back to their Eastern Mediterranean origins. Harbor engineering was perhaps their most practical achievement. In Tyre and Sidon, the Phoenicians constructed artificial breakwaters and stone quays that allowed ships to dock securely in rough waters. This knowledge spread through their colonies. Carthage's double harbor, with separate basins for warships and merchant vessels, was so advanced that Roman engineers studied and adapted it for their own ports. In domestic architecture, Phoenician houses were typically built around central courtyards, providing ventilation and light, a design principle still common in Mediterranean homes today. Decorative wall plaster, painted with geometric or floral designs, added color and warmth to interiors, while intricate mosaic floors became a feature adopted and expanded by later Roman builders. Even after Phoenician political independence was lost, their building traditions persisted. Roman temples in the Levant often stood on Phoenician foundations. Fortifications in North Africa reused Carthaginian stonework. And in some coastal towns, the layout of streets and harbor structures followed patterns first established by Phoenician planners. Through stone, timber, and ingenuity, the Phoenicians left more than ruins. They left a blueprint, one that architects and engineers would continue to adapt for centuries. Their buildings were not merely functional. They were enduring expressions of a people whose lives were shaped by trade, religion, and the sea. Of all the treasures that flowed from Phoenician ports, glass was among the most enchanting. Translucent, colorful, and endlessly adaptable, it was a craft the Phoenicians elevated to an art form, and one whose influence would stretch across centuries and continents. The city of Sidon was famed as the beating heart of this industry. Here, artisans transformed humble sand, soda ash, and lime into shimmering vessels, beads, and ornaments. Their furnaces glowed day and night, the air rich with the heat of molten glass being coaxed into delicate forms. Early Phoenician glass was often opaque, dyed in deep blues, greens, and ambers with mineral pigments. Over time, techniques evolved to produce clearer, more transparent pieces. The artisans mastered core forming, where molten glass was wound around a clay or sand core, then shaped with metal tools and decorated with colorful trails or zigzag patterns. The designs were as varied as the markets they served. Egyptians favored glass amulets in the shapes of sacred animals and deities. Greeks prized elegant perfume bottles and drinking vessels. In the West, glass beads and inlays adorned jewelry, belts, and even weapon hilts. Phoenician glassmaking was not limited to beauty. It was also a valuable trade commodity. Lightweight yet precious, glass could be shipped across vast distances without spoiling, making it ideal for long voyages. Merchants carried it to every corner of the Mediterranean, exchanging it for metals, spices, textiles, and grain. Even after the Phoenicians came under foreign rule, their glass-making traditions endured. Roman glassblowers in the Levant learned from Phoenician masters, adopting and expanding techniques like blowpipe glassmaking, which revolutionized production. Many Roman luxury items, from elaborate tableware to intricate mosaics, bore the unmistakable DNA of Phoenician craft. Archaeologists today still unearth Phoenician glass pieces, some perfectly preserved, their colors as vivid as the day they left the furnace. Each is a tangible link to the skilled hands that shaped it, pile, and to the bustling workshops where sand was transformed into treasure. For the Phoenicians, glass was more than a product. It was a symbol of ingenuity and adaptability. Just as their ships carried ideas across seas, their glass carried artistry across time. The Phoenicians were more than skilled sailors. They were maritime innovators whose designs and techniques influenced naval engineering for generations. From their earliest fishing boats to their great merchant galleys and warships, every vessel carried lessons learned from centuries of navigating the Mediterranean and beyond. One of their most important contributions was the development of the bireme, a ship with two banks of oars that offered both speed and maneuverability. This design allowed for rapid movement in calm or adverse winds and gave war galleys the ability to execute complex battle maneuvers. The bireme would later inspire the trireme and other advanced vessels used by Greeks and Romans. They were also pioneers in hull construction. Using the mortise and tenon technique, planks were joined tightly without nails, making ships both strong and flexible enough to withstand rough seas. The cedar wood they favored was resistant to rot, giving their vessels exceptional longevity. In navigation, the Phoenicians relied on more than instinct. They mastered celestial navigation, using the North Star as a fixed guide at night. They also observed seasonal wind patterns, ocean currents, and the behavior of seabirds to chart courses across long distances. Many of these skills were passed on to the Greeks, Persians, and later, Roman navigators. The Phoenicians also perfected modular ship design for commerce. Merchant vessels could be easily refitted for different cargo types: amphorae of oil and wine, stacks of timber, or even live animals. They developed standardized cargo containers, making loading and unloading more efficient in busy ports. Their harbors, too, showed innovation. Artificial breakwaters created calm docking areas, while stone quays with built-in mooring posts allowed ships to be secured quickly. Some harbors had hidden dry docks, where vessels could be repaired out of sight from potential rivals. These advancements did not remain confined to Phoenicia. As their ships traveled, so did their knowledge. Greek shipbuilders incorporated Phoenician hull shapes into their designs. Roman engineers adapted their harbor construction methods. Even centuries later, medieval Mediterranean shipwrights used principles first mastered in Phoenician yards. Through their innovations, the Phoenicians turned the sea from a dangerous barrier into a highway of opportunity. Their designs were not only practical, but visionary, ensuring that their influence as master mariners would endure long after their cities had fallen silent. Long after Phoenician ships ceased to sail under their own banners, the Tyrian purple dye they perfected remained a mark of wealth, authority, and prestige. More than a color, it was a statement, a visible declaration that the wearer belonged to the highest ranks of society. The dye's origins were humble. The small murex sea snail found along the rocky coasts of Phoenicia. Extracting the pigment was labor-intensive and foul-smelling, but the result was a dye so deep and lasting that sunlight and washing only enriched its tone. The Phoenicians built an entire industry around it, with Tyre at its heart. When Rome absorbed Phoenicia, the Romans inherited the purple trade and made it their own. But they never forgot its origin. Roman emperors reserved imperial purple for themselves and issued sumptuary laws forbidding commoners from wearing it. Senators wore togas with purple stripes. Generals donned purple cloaks during triumphs. The dye became synonymous with imperial power, diplomacy, and the divine right to rule. In Byzantium, the tradition deepened. The phrase "born in the purple" described royal heirs born in special purple-decorated chambers of the imperial palace. Purple ink, made with the rare dye, was used for official imperial documents. Even in medieval Europe, centuries after the Phoenicians were gone, purple remained a luxury reserved for monarchs, high clergy, and the very wealthy. The memory of its source was woven into the lore. Writers and historians continued to associate Tyrian purple with the ancient cities of Phoenicia. The story of its discovery, a dog belonging to the god Melkart biting into a murex shell and staining its mouth purple, was retold from age to age, blending myth with history. Though natural Tyrian purple eventually declined with the fall of empires and the rise of cheaper dyes, it never lost its mystique. In the modern era, chemists have reproduced it, but at great expense. The original process, with its secretive workshops and guarded knowledge, remains a marvel of ancient industry. In this way, Tyrian purple became one of the Phoenicians' most enduring legacies. It colored the robes of kings, the banners of empires, and the imagination of generations who never saw the shores where it was first made. It was, in essence, a piece of Phoenicia that the world never stopped wearing. For centuries, the Phoenicians lived on in legend, known from the writings of Greeks, Romans, and Hebrews, yet rarely speaking in their own voice. That began to change in the modern era, when archaeology uncovered the physical traces of their civilization, revealing the beauty, skill, and reach of the purple traders of the sea. In Byblos, excavations revealed ancient harbor structures, massive stone walls, and temples dedicated to Baalat Gebal, the city's chief goddess. Stone inscriptions in Phoenician script gave scholars direct access to the language itself, confirming its role as the ancestor of many modern alphabets. Tyre and Sidon yielded rich finds from their harbors and necropolises. Carved sarcophagi with detailed reliefs, gold jewelry, glass vessels, and the remains of the very murex shells used to make Tyrian purple. Underwater archaeology brought up anchors, amphorae, and even remnants of ancient quays, showing how the cities once dominated maritime trade. Carthage, though destroyed by Rome, left behind extraordinary evidence of its power. Excavations uncovered its double harbor, visible even today, and the Bursa Hill, where monumental public buildings once stood. Artifacts from Carthaginian homes and workshops revealed a blending of Phoenician heritage with local North African styles. Far beyond the homeland, Phoenician goods appear in places where their ships once docked. Ivory carvings in Assyrian palaces, glass beads in Iberia, and amphorae in Sardinia. These finds map the trade routes of the ancient Mediterranean as clearly as any written record. One of the most exciting developments has been underwater exploration. Off the coast of Spain, divers have found shipwrecks laden with amphorae, glassware, and metal ingots, frozen in time since the day they sank. Some still carry cargoes that tell the story of a voyage cut short. Cedar planks stacked neatly, jars sealed with resin, or trade goods packed for distant markets. Each discovery adds a new piece to the puzzle of Phoenician life. We see not only the luxury goods that made them famous, but also the tools of everyday existence. Fishing hooks, loom weights, cooking pots. These humble items remind us that behind the great ships and empires were ordinary people, craftsmen, sailors, mothers, children, living their lives by the rhythm of the sea. Through archaeology, the Phoenicians are no longer just a name in ancient texts. They emerge as a living people, their story told in stone, glass, and clay. And with each new excavation, their legacy shines brighter, like sunlight caught in a shard of Sidonian glass, pulled from the deep. Though the Phoenicians vanished from the political map more than 2,000 years ago, their myths and legends still travel, not by ship this time, but through books, films, television, and art. Modern storytellers have rediscovered their tales, blending history and imagination to bring the purple traders back into popular culture. One of the most enduring myths is that of Queen Dido of Carthage. Immortalized in Virgil's Aeneid, she is portrayed as a tragic queen who founded her city in exile, only to take her own life when abandoned by the Trojan hero Aeneas. At Berceau, the story has inspired countless paintings, operas, and plays, often emphasizing themes of love, loyalty, and political ambition. The legend of Europa, the Phoenician princess abducted by Zeus in the form of a bull, has been retold for millennia, from Greek pottery to Renaissance frescoes to modern novels. Today, Europa's image even appears on European currency, a reminder that this continent's name is rooted in Phoenician lore. In recent decades, historical fiction authors have reimagined the great voyages of Phoenician mariners, tales of daring traders venturing beyond the known world, discovering new lands, and guarding the secret of Tyrian purple. Some novels set in the ancient Mediterranean now weave Phoenician characters into larger narratives involving Greeks, Egyptians, and Romans. On screen, the Phoenicians often appear in documentaries exploring ancient trade and navigation. Dramatic reenactments show their ships gliding across turquoise waters, their harbors bustling with goods from faraway lands. In some fantasy series and games, fictional maritime empires are inspired by the Phoenicians' blend of commerce, diplomacy, and naval power. Artists, too, have embraced Phoenician themes. Modern sculptures depict the curved prows of their ships, or the spiral shells of the murex snail. Painters recreate bustling markets of Tyre and Sidon in vivid color. Jewelry designers draw on ancient motifs like the Tanit symbol or winged sphinxes, blending them with contemporary fashion. In academic circles, the Phoenicians are enjoying a resurgence of interest, as historians and archaeologists bring new evidence to light. These discoveries often inspire media creators to reframe old stories with fresh accuracy, showing the Phoenicians not merely as mysterious middlemen, but as innovators and cultural connectors in their own right. In this way, the Phoenicians live on, not only in museums and textbooks, but in the collective imagination. Whether through myth, literature, or visual art, they continue to sail into the worlds of those who have never seen their shores, proving that a good story, like a well-built ship, can cross oceans of time. The Phoenicians may have vanished as a political force, but the principles that made them successful still resonate today. Their history offers timeless lessons, not just for sailors and traders, but for anyone navigating a world of competition, change, and opportunity. Across centuries, the Phoenicians lived under Egyptian, Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and Roman rule. In each case, they adjusted their alliances, trade strategies, and even cultural expressions to fit the political climate. They understood that stubborn defiance could lead to destruction, while strategic compromise could ensure survival and even prosperity. The Phoenicians never formed a single unified empire. Instead, they built a web of city-states and colonies linked by trade routes and shared culture. This decentralized network allowed them to recover quickly from local setbacks, since no single city's fall meant the end of their entire system. Their mastery of navigation, shipbuilding, and languages gave them a competitive edge that no amount of gold could buy. They guarded certain secrets, like the process of making Tyrian purple, while freely sharing others to win allies, teaching foreign partners their alphabet. Phoenician merchants were cultural ambassadors. Every exchange of goods was also an exchange of ideas, art, and customs. They built trust through fair dealings, consistent quality, and the ability to communicate across cultures. This reputation opened doors that armies could not. Even after their cities fell, Phoenician influence continued through their alphabet, craftsmanship, and maritime innovations. This endurance shows that lasting impact is built not only through political might, but through contributions that become part of humanity's shared heritage. Warthens. In today's interconnected world, these lessons feel strikingly modern. Businesses and nations alike can learn from the Phoenician emphasis on flexibility, network building, innovation, and cultural exchange. They remind us that dominance is never permanent, but influence, if cultivated wisely, can last for millennia. The Phoenicians were more than purple traders. They were bridge builders between civilizations, masters of adaptation, and proof that in an ever-changing sea, those who can read the winds and adjust their sails will always find a way forward. More than 2,000 years after the last Phoenician merchant ship left its harbor, their sea routes still draw explorers, historians, and sailors eager to follow in their wake. From the Levant to Gibraltar, the ancient pathways of the purple traders are being sailed again. Not for profit, but for discovery. Modern maritime archaeology projects have reconstructed Phoenician-style vessels using traditional materials and techniques. In Ersenling, one such replica, Phoenicia, embarked on a voyage to circumnavigate Africa, echoing the legendary journey commissioned by Pharaoh Necho II. The ship's cedar hull, square sails, and oar banks were built exactly as they would have been in the 6th century BCE, and its crew navigated by stars and coastal landmarks, just as the ancients did. Other expeditions have retraced Phoenician trade routes through the Mediterranean, stopping at historic ports like Byblos, Tyre, Sidon, Carthage, and Cadiz. Along the way, these voyages have brought together archaeologists, historians, and local communities to celebrate shared heritage. In each harbor, the sight of the reconstructed ship sparks curiosity, a tangible connection to a time when the sea was the great highway of commerce and culture. Tourism has also embraced the idea of sailing the ancient routes. Luxury cruises and educational voyages now follow paths inspired by Phoenician trade networks, blending leisure with history. Passengers explore archaeological sites by day and enjoy lectures on deck at night under the same constellations that guided Phoenician navigators. These modern journeys reveal not just the geography of ancient trade, but the enduring human spirit of exploration. The challenges of wind, weather, and open water are much the same now as they were 3 millennia ago. Modern sailors speak of the same awe and sometimes fear when a sudden squall darkens the horizon, or when a perfect breeze fills the sail and carries the vessel swiftly toward its next port. In retracing the Phoenicians' paths, today's mariners and scholars also rediscover the cultural exchange that defined their voyages. Just as in ancient times, conversations at the docks cross languages and nationalities. The cargo may be cameras and notebooks instead of purple cloth and glass, then the CCs of notebooks, but the purpose sharing knowledge and building connections remains unchanged. The sea remembers, and as long as there are those willing to hoist a sail and follow the old currents, the Phoenicians' roots will never truly fade more than 2,000 years after the last Phoenician merchant ship left its harbor. Their sea routes still draw explorers, historians, and sailors eager to follow in their wake. From the Levant to Gibraltar, the ancient pathways of the purple traders are being sailed again, not for profit, but for discovery. Modern maritime archaeology projects have reconstructed Phoenician-style vessels using traditional materials and techniques. In Ersenlingbar, one such replica, Phoenicia, embarked on a voyage to circumnavigate Africa, echoing the legendary journey commissioned by Pharaoh Necho II. The ship's cedar hull, square sails, and oar banks were built exactly as they would have been in the 6th century BCE, and its crew navigated by stars and coastal landmarks, just as the ancients did. Other expeditions have retraced Phoenician trade routes through the Mediterranean, stopping at historic ports like Byblos, Tyre, Sidon, Carthage, and Cadiz. Along the way, these voyages have brought together archaeologists, historians, and local communities to celebrate shared heritage. In each harbor, the sight of the reconstructed ship sparks curiosity, a tangible connection to a time when the sea was the great highway of commerce and culture. Tourism has also embraced the idea of sailing the ancient routes. Luxury cruises and educational voyages now follow paths inspired by Phoenician trade networks, blending leisure with history. Passengers explore archaeological sites by day and enjoy lectures on deck at night, under the same constellations that guided Phoenician navigators. These modern journeys reveal not just the geography of ancient trade, but the enduring human spirit of exploration.